Forget what you think you know about the Middle Ages. Behind the towering castles, bloody battles, and royal feasts, there was another world. One lived in the shadows. One traded not in gold or power, but in flesh. This is the story of the women often ignored by history who walked cobblestone streets under moonlight, survived in brothels, bathhouses, and city alleys, and defied a world that judged them, yet could not live without them. From public shame to surprising legal protections, from religious condemnation to royal indulgence, being a prostitute in medieval Europe wasn't just dangerous, it was a paradox. So, what was life really like for a prostitute in the Middle Ages? Let's step back in time and find out. In medieval Europe, prostitution was both condemned and tolerated. The church officially labeled it a sin, yet secular authorities often allowed it to function under regulated systems. Prostitution was seen as a necessary evil, a way to prevent greater sexual crimes such as adultery or rape. Most towns had designated areas or brothels where prostitution was permitted. These areas were often located on the fringes of society near city walls, docks, or outside parish boundaries. Prostitutes were required to wear distinctive clothing such as striped hoods or yellow bands to mark their status. The women who entered this trade came from various backgrounds. Some were orphans, widows, or abandoned wives. Others were driven by poverty, lack of social support, or limited opportunities for work. While some worked independently, many were managed by brothel keepers who took a large portion of their earnings. Despite being marginalized, prostitutes were a visible part of medieval urban life. They served both locals and travelers, and in some regions, municipal governments even licensed brothels and collected taxes from them. Though scorned publicly, prostitution remained a deeply entrenched part of medieval society, revealing the contradictions between religious doctrine, law, and everyday human behavior. While the church condemned prostitution, many medieval towns developed legal frameworks to regulate it. Authorities believed that controlling the practice was more effective than trying to eliminate it entirely. In cities like London, Paris, and Florence, local governments licensed brothels, set operating hours, and even dictated what prostitutes could wear. In some places, brothels were municipal businesses. Towns would appoint a manager, often a woman known as the abbess or madam, who oversaw the workers, collected taxes, and ensured rules were followed. These regulations were usually framed as measures to protect public morality and maintain order, not to support the rights or well-being of the women themselves. Prostitutes were often barred from living in certain areas or entering churches. They could be fined for violating curfews or dressing like respectable women. However, within the license system, they were sometimes granted a degree of legal protection from assault and exploitation, as their work contributed to the local economy. Still, this protection was minimal and inconsistent. Outside the system, especially in rural areas or smaller towns, prostitutes had no such safety. They were subject to public punishment, including flogging, branding, or being paraded through the streets. Regulated or not, control rather than compassion defined their legal reality. Life as a prostitute in medieval times was harsh, uncertain, and often dangerous. Most women lived in cramped quarters, either within brothels or in rented rooms near the outskirts of town. These spaces were usually overcrowded, poorly ventilated, and lacked basic sanitation. Clean water was scarce and waste disposal was primitive, leading to constant health risks. Food and clothing were minimal. Prostitutes often wore secondhand garments or had to buy specific clothing to mark their profession, such as striped cloaks or veils in certain cities. This clothing made them easy to identify and limited their freedom in public spaces. Their daily routine depended on the setting. In regulated brothels, they were expected to work certain hours, keep records of clients, and follow house rules. Independent prostitutes had more flexibility, but also faced greater risks: abuse, robbery, or arrest without the protection of a licensed establishment. Clients ranged from common laborers to wealthy merchants and even clergy. Despite their status, many women developed close-knit communities among themselves for support and protection. Friendships, though forged in difficult circumstances, were essential to survival. For most, prostitution wasn't a choice, but a necessity, and day by day, survival was the only goal. Health was one of the greatest challenges faced by prostitutes in medieval times. Living and working in unsanitary conditions with limited access to medical care made them especially vulnerable to illness and infection. Sexually transmitted diseases, though not fully understood, were common. One of the most feared was syphilis, which spread rapidly through urban centers by the late medieval period. Medical knowledge at the time was primitive, often based on superstition and outdated theories like the imbalance of bodily humors. Treatments ranged from herbal remedies to dangerous procedures involving bloodletting or mercury, some of which caused more harm than good. Prostitutes rarely received proper care unless they could afford it or were admitted to charity-run hospitals. In some cities, public bathhouses were used as both places of work and sources of cleanliness, but they also became hotspots for the spread of disease. Church-run institutions sometimes offered basic care, but these came with harsh judgment and forced repentance. Mental health was not recognized as a concept, let alone treated. In the medieval world, survival often meant enduring constant pain, both seen and unseen. Prostitutes in medieval Europe lived under the constant weight of public judgment. Society viewed them as morally corrupt, yet paradoxically necessary. They were shamed by the church, mocked in literature, and often blamed for society's moral decay. Still, their presence was quietly accepted, especially by those who secretly used their services. Religious leaders preached against prostitution, calling it sinful and degrading. Women in the trade were seen as fallen or impure, beyond redemption, unless they repented and left the profession. Public sermons and religious festivals sometimes included rituals or punishments meant to humiliate prostitutes, reinforcing their place at the bottom of the social hierarchy. Despite this stigma, many people depended on their services. City officials tolerated and regulated the trade to maintain public order, and some clients came from the nobility or clergy themselves, adding layers of hypocrisy to the judgment prostitutes faced. In popular culture, prostitutes were often portrayed as symbols of temptation or cautionary tales, yet their real lives were far more complex. While some communities treated them with contempt, others allowed them to participate in limited social or charitable events, provided they followed strict rules. Acceptance was conditional, judgment was constant, respect was almost unheard of. The lives of medieval prostitutes were full of contradiction, tolerated yet shamed, necessary yet despised. Their stories remind us how deeply society can rely on what it refuses to respect. If you found this glimpse into the past thought-provoking, let us know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to see how far history travels. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you want more hidden chapters of the past. Until next time, stay curious.